Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you are keeping safe. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, the CEO of FIDIC, and welcome to our State of the World webinar series, Establishing the Value of Water, the Business Case for a Change. Actually, it's not just a simple change, it's a radical change. You are all welcome to join us wherever you are around the world. I'm told that we have over 800 people register, and they're all from 113 countries around the world, which is extremely fantastic, with the United States being on top of the list, with Kenya and India, United Kingdom, South Africa, and the list goes on. So we are delighted to have you joining us as one of our programs today. Today's program is actually quite important in the sense that water is a key ingredient that society needs to survive, and somehow do we value as we should be? If we don't, then we have an opportunity to debate it. Now, my session is really to give you some feedback from what we've been doing in the past. Over the last 12 months, we've been doing a lot on this sort of FIDIC webinar. We've done 26 webinars so far, and it's still running and it's continuing. Over 20,000 people register to participate. We've had over 11,500 as of today, from 150 countries, different parts of the world being involved. And beside the webinar itself, people go back on the YouTube, which we always do. We've had 19,000 extra people viewing our product. You may want to know some of the key factors that's come out of the webinars we've run over the year. There is the issue that life will never get the same after the COVID. There's be a new normal. There's the issue about the economic impact is going to be significant on our society, 1 to 2 trillion of investment. The issue about well-being of staff will be critical wherever you are, whether you are a client, your organization, your consultant, your contractor, your supply chain, it will impact your staff. There is the issue about contract. What does it mean on contract procedure, delay, an issue about communication within your company, outside your company, with your stakeholders. These are big issues. We hope we are doing ours as FIDIC to communicate with our stakeholder. There is the issue about shift in investment profile, because we've had a sluggish of 12 months where very little is happening apart from dealing with the crisis. The infrastructure, the short, medium, and long-term agenda will change. How does that change? Some of the subject we'll be talking about later will be impacting that. Then the issue for the industry to work together to find a solution in collaborative manner is critical. And the final point of reference is really, it doesn't matter who you are, small, large, big, or multinational, you will be impacted by what is happening. So how do we go for this year? We've decided we're going to do 3-in-1 program, which is we look about how do we bring our committee activities to the forefront. This is part of changing our business model. So there will be a series of committee webinars. There's one coming up next week. We had one on Tuesday. Then we have the State of the World report. We've produced one. There's another one coming up after this, and there will be more to come in future. Then we are looking at issue about COVID specific. How is that continue to impact our industry, and what are we doing, and what can we do as an industry umbrella body to make sure we are relevant and we're helping our members and the industry. And so from that point of view, there's never any dull moment. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce FIDIC President, who continuously support me and support the whole of the FIDIC staff in making sure that we do not miss any of our program. Bill, the floor is yours. You have so much on the background on this particular subject. I want you to do a little bit more than your normal introduction and paint the picture of how we get here and what we are trying to achieve on this particular paper, because I know this subject is close to your heart. Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nelson. And just to elaborate on what you said, my background is environmental engineering, and particularly in water. So that's what my particular background is. And Murphy's Law just hit. When you introduced me, my screen went blank, Nelson, but hopefully everyone can see me. At any rate, I first of all, I want to thank you, Nelson, and the Secretariat for putting on these webinars. It has been a real challenge to put these webinars on, and you folks have done just an incredible job. And it has really helped FIDIC a lot in our goal to be the voice of the international engineering community. As you said, Nelson, we've reached out to 20,000 people, and importantly, not just engineers and architects and contractors. We're reaching out to all sorts of stakeholders and all sorts of people with an interest in the challenges that we face. And there's a theme here with our water challenges that I'll get to in a minute that ties right back to that. I also wanted to thank our speakers for joining us today. I know they're very, very busy, but you'll find them to be a very diverse group from their backgrounds, perhaps as diverse as we've had in any of our sessions. So thank you very much. And participants, thank you for joining us on this very important subject. And before I forget, there'll be a follow-up webinar on water where we're going to focus more on strategies to resolve problems. Today, we're going to hear about a lot about the problems, some strategies, but the next one will be focusing more on the strategies. In many ways, this State of the World report is really a follow-up of a 2015 report that we wrote on water challenges, and I was a primary author along with April Gu and Miguel Garcia, who are with us today as well. So the three of us are authored that 2015 report. So if you haven't had a look at it, you may want to glance through it because a lot of what we're saying today just builds on it. I could talk a long time about the water issues that we're facing, but they are incredibly complicated. I believe they're getting worse from the challenges standpoint, but there's a lot of good news as well. There's a lot of very good research and very good innovation going on. And I believe, somewhat actually related to COVID, that the world is getting more and more aware of some of the critical challenges that we face in our environment in general. And I think this is a real opportunity to take advantage of that and build on this awareness. And that is a huge element to resolving our problems. Before I turn it back to Nelson, I just go back to that 2015 report. There were four basic recommendations in that report, four ideas. And one was to have everyone having access to clean water and sanitation. The second one was to close the demand and supply gap. The third one was planning for climate change. And the fourth one was adequate infrastructure investment. And it suffices to say that we have not achieved any of those. But having said that, there has been progress in every one of them in all sorts of ways. And I think that progress is going to continue. And just to mention a little bit more on the last one, we're talking about some money issues during this presentation, and the trillions of dollars are needed to close the infrastructure investment gap. However, less money is needed than what the world wastes every year on corruption, and we need to to remember that if we could ever solve the corruption problem, we would free up monies that we desperately need for other purposes. And in the 2021 report, we've talked about the need to appreciate the value of water, the business case for change, and the two of the three recommendations really involved in getting all stakeholders involved in solving our water challenges. And really, we are all stakeholders from that standpoint. We need to expand our communication, and that's what FIDIC is really trying to do, to tie back to what I said in the beginning. We need, as engineers and scientists, to do better at communicating with other professionals and other stakeholders to get them involved in helping us solve our challenges. So that's the Reader's Digest version of my experience of water. And back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much for that very insightful of how we got to where we are. And for those who are probably, strange to the world of the FIDIC State of the World, if I remember precisely, I think we started with one called sustainability. Then there was a big one on infrastructure, and now we did one which was to do with water. In the new series, we started with infrastructure, and there was a big agenda as to 7 trillion to be invested so that we can meet the SDG agenda. At this point in time, for me, I think, it may be interesting. When we published that paper a few weeks back, we're talking about trillions and trillions of investment to go into that. And interestingly, Natalie also contributed, and she's with us. I'm delighted she's with us. So that report is out there, it's available for people to read, because that said the same in terms of the big macro issue in the part of the whole of the infrastructure. What we are focusing on today, as Bill correctly said, is launching this particular report, which will be supported by the UN and which is actually quite good. The report will be available immediately as we speak now, and our press release will be going out and people can download it. But it gives me a great pleasure to actually say it's been a long journey to get it to where it is, and I'm delighted that we've launched this one today. I do believe, as Bill said, the second one will follow very quickly. If it's not May, it will be June, but definitely it's coming through. And we build on this to move forward. At this point in time, before we dive into the conversation, I always really want to get started by asking questions. So I'm going to ask the participant to do, ask yes or no question. Do you believe that the value of water is sufficiently recognized to ensure universal clean water and wastewater provision by 2030? Do you believe that the value is sufficiently recognized? Yes or no? Yes or no? It'd be good to get the feedback from that. There is another, question I want to put across to everybody. Barbara, are we in a position to show the answer from the question? 76% people said no. In another word, we do not value water sufficiently enough. And there is a game and it's a language and there's a big issue as to how we can increase the conversation. So that is very much, in alignment. Second question, from the audience, which I believe says, do you believe that the value of water is sufficiently recognized to ensure environmental and sustainable outcome by 2030? I believe this is going to the sustainability development goal. Do we really believe that the value of water is sufficiently recognized to ensure we deliver the sustainability agenda for 2030? Yes or no? It'll be interesting to find out where we are. There is the third, poll, which I will put it to you towards the end of the day, but it'll be interesting to get the feedback. Barbara, do we get the feedback on that? Thank you. 80% of people said no. I think I could say that basically summarized, that's going to be the main item of this. That yes, 70% said, we don't value, and 80% said we have no chance of meeting the 2030 goal. That is quite interesting. Now, at this point in time, I suspect, I'm going to go into the main part of the conversation. What I hope we're going to do this afternoon is I'm going to invite Graham, our head of economic and strategic policy, who has been responsible for collecting this information, pulling it together. And thank you to all those who contributed, to all our members around the world, all our committees and everybody. But Graham is now going to be invited to give us a very quick sustained summary of the report. And after that, we then go into Q&A session, which I'm going to put to the panelists, and then we'll open the question across to all the participants later on. So Graham, would you take the floor and give us in a nugget what the key message of the report is, and we then go into Q&A after that. Graham?
Thank you, Nelson. For 5 minutes, I'll spend some time, and I'm going to go through effectively the sort of timeframes, some scene setting. We'll talk about the investment need, just to relate it to the last report, some pricing and value and sort of models, sort of discussion about the ways in which we're looking at the investments. Then we'll talk about the externalities, because we have to remember that the cost of doing nothing is not zero or nothing. So that's quite important. And then from that, I'll briefly talk about the recommendations and tee up all of the speakers to solve the problems. So let's start with timing. At the moment, we've got 3,196 days until we hit 2030 to hit the SDG goals. Now, if we work out 20% of those are weekends, and if we suspect that we're probably going to lose another year due to COVID, we've actually only got 2,192 days left to solve this. That's quite a big challenge. We've lost almost 20% of our time and we haven't even started. So going forward, there is a lot that we've got to do to plan, fund, procure, design, build, and make assets operational or get to the point where we need to. So let's set the scene on some of the challenges we have. If we look at global water demand over the past 100 years, it increased 600%. That's significant. And going forward, it looks like it still will increase. The current situation is that 2.7 billion people experience water scarcity problems at least one month out of a year. That's 30% of the global population having an issue on an annual basis. Global demand is expected to increase 20 to 30% by 2050. So we're not just talking about getting to 2030, we've actually got to talk about getting beyond 2030 as well. There are 500 dead zones in our oceans, which are not good for obviously wildlife and marine life and sustainability. And 70% of the world's freshwater demand is currently put into food production. So you'll see in the report, one of the things we talk about is the food, water, energy nexus, and the fact of the relationships and the complexity of all of these systems. So let's talk about the investment need for a moment. So if you look at countries across the globe, on average over the last 3 years, you've seen about 4.9% rises in their investment. And out of those, 80% say that is not sufficient increases in water spending to meet their current challenges. So we're not accelerating towards 2030 at the moment. We're just catching up to where we need to be again. If we look at the challenge we put forward to the industry in the last State of the World report, where we said we're looking at 7 trillion a year up to 2030 to meet the SDGs as a minimum. 2 trillion of that challenge is water related. That's 2 trillion a year for 10 years. That's $20 trillion we've got to find. And as Bill points out, it doesn't have to magically appear from printing money. It can be found in ways, for example, by reducing corruption, being more efficient, and actually investing in sensible ways. So let's look at water pricing and value. So if you look at Latin America and the Caribbean, you've seen that water utilities have adopted things like block schemes and pricing methods, where actually encourages people not to have excessive water use. If you look at unit rates that occur around much of the rest of the globe, they don't always incentivize the right behaviors, because the marginal cost of using the extra water does not increase. So it asks the question, do we actually value water as societies? Now, that question is very different depending upon which country you're in. If you're looking at developing worlds, water comes out of taps, wastewater services, they're generally probably taken as given to a large extent, but that doesn't mean there aren't environmental challenges and items that are occurring there. If you then look at developing countries, it's how you get that water and the infrastructure in place so that it's used. And as you'll see when we come to one of the externalities, that has quite a big impact on food production and actually the costs that are accumulated there. So what sort of methods are we looking at? So if you look at a number of countries, they're now looking at TOTEX models. So you're looking at capital and operational investment, so that actually you're more efficient over the project. Projects have to look sustainable going forward, not only in finance terms, but environmental terms. We don't want to build white elephants or infrastructure that in 10 years' time is no longer useful to us. So it is important that financiers, funders, designers, engineers, architects, constructors, and the list goes on, all work together so that we get the best outcomes and solutions. Now, investment into those will be public, it could be private money, it could be mixed money. You even have some interesting things with community schemes where they're investing. So the sources of finance are not going to be just one solution fits all. They also have to go across borders. This is a global problem. It doesn't just disappear when you get to a regional or a national boundary. So it's important that we consider those. Now, within this, there's various models that exist, like PFI, PPP, are sort of regulated asset bases. And there are some interesting models that are occurring across the globe. For example, I can name one in the UK where they've actually got a project or a direct procurement of customers where they take some of the investment out of the AMP cycle, so that if there is a benefit to customers or environment, investments can occur at the time they need to, rather than when the regulatory cycle dictates they do. All of this is key about getting customers involved. If we look at carbon over the last 10 years, many more people are aware of what the carbon emissions consequences are, if you like, of buying a product, transporting a product, doing things like that. The same of water is not recognized through the supply chain and the cycle through which it is used. And so we have to ask ourselves, how do we get this value? And I mean, the results of the poll at the front end was quite interesting, because it does prove we haven't solved that problem yet. So let's look at the externalities, and then I will hand over to the speakers. So if you take food, in sub-Saharan Africa, food losses add up to about 4 billion annually. And that is between harvest and point of sale. If you take that to the developed world, if you look at America, food waste after they've bought it is approximately 30 to 40%. So whilst the problem shifts in the chain, actually the issue still exists, because that is water that could have been used for something else that would have had a productive outcome. If we look at the oceans, they're saying that the oceans could still rise by between 1 and 4 feet by the end of 2100, which may seem like a long way away. It's not. If you look at coastal resources, they reckon coastal resources or industries are worth 3 trillion a year. So a loss in that would be substantive. The OECD reckon that 150 million people and 35 trillion of property will be at risk of coastal flooding. Glaciers, more than 20% of the world's population are affected in one way or other by their melting. Plastics, 90% of bottled water now contains microplastics. That was one stat I learned that quite surprised me. And chemicals of emerging concern are increasingly becoming an issue. I'll let the experts talk about that one. That's a very complicated subject from what I've read. And then you get on to scarcity. 25% of the world's population are experiencing that water scarcity. That means we're not being productive. So let's look at the recommendations in the report. Effectively, I'll boil down to one sentence for each recommendation, and then I'll hand over to the speakers. The first one is, how do we pay and develop the infrastructure? The second one is to create a better understanding of the value of water across stakeholders and the supply chain. And the third one is, we are all in this together, to pick a catchphrase from politics lately. We cannot do this single-handedly, and we all have to work together as an industry and as a society to solve this problem. And with that, Nelson, I will hand back to yourself.
Thank you very much, Graham, for that insight into the report. I think, that is very sustained. I'm sure there's a lot of food for thought in the main report. For those who are interested, I will encourage you to please do get it and have a look at it. At this point in time, I'm not an expert, even though I happen to be a civil engineer in the field, but we've got world-class, speakers here or panelists. And I'm just going to go very quickly through their names and then come back and introduce them one at a time and put a few questions to them. We're going to go through that session as quickly as we can. First is Peter Guthrie from Cambridge University, April Go from Cornell University, Jessica from Development Bosch from South Africa, Natalie from Cardinal, and then we got Miguel Mondrell from TIPSEL. What I intend to do over these next, 20 minutes or 25 minutes is to put a few questions to them. So if I start off with Peter Guthrie, you were probably the engineer of the first report on sustainability. And my question to you, Peter, is first, can you introduce yourself? And then also, I'll put a few questions to you. Peter, you take the floor.
Nelson, thank you very much. It's good to be part of this very important report and to have the opportunity to contribute. I'm a civil engineer also, the same as Nelson, and I'm since 2000 have been Professor of Engineering for Sustainable Development at Cambridge University, but before that I had 25 years in consultancy with a company that is now part of AECOM, working on large-scale infrastructure projects and appropriate technology projects in developing countries.
So thank you very much, Peter. It's good to have you back on, and I'm really delighted, as Bill said earlier, to have you back and your insightful contribution. I'm going to look at it from education side of it, Peter. The report outlines significance of challenge that we face when balancing the business case for water. How do you believe that we educate our customers more on how the value of water travel through not only the chain but also location? How can we link the concept such as total expenditure together? Peter.
The total expenditure approach is a very important new development. It's relatively new to think about the whole life of a facility, including the operational costs and the initial capital cost. But it should go much wider than that. And of course, because water is a physical asset, the responsibility falls to companies and authorities who have a defined terms of reference. But the implications of what those authorities and companies carry out and deliver has much wider implications. And so the basket of stakeholders who are involved in these decisions should be broader than it already is. Of course, that's attempted through the political process, through the decision-making process, and through regulators. But I think there is an important issue that the terms of reference against which water supply is provided to communities should be broadened to include much more explicitly the environmental consequences on a wider scale. And of course, we have, to a very large extent in the developed world, exported many of the water scarcity problems to countries which supply us with goods. So that we need to also take responsibility for that water that is consumed elsewhere, but from which we benefit.
Thank you very much. The next question I have for you is very much looking at the grey water side of it. And so the use of grey water, etc., as we know it, facility is important as is water demand. How do you see the business case for such activity evolving as they're harder to retrofit and to existing infrastructure than to include in new development?
Yes, it's a very important area. And of course, there's been a lot of rather backward-looking excuses for insisting on providing potable water as the only supply in many countries. And actually, it is an entirely wasteful activity. We need to be more mature about the way in which we get to grips with providing non-potable water for non-potable uses and confining our treatment costs and technologies for potable water only where it's actually needed. This will be a major shift for many sophisticated and developing countries.
Thanks very much, Peter. At this point, I'm going to bring April in. I've been informed by Bill that April was one of those who contributed into the first report. So I'm delighted, April, to have you on board. Would you be kind to do a very quick introduction of who you are from Cornell, and then I'll put a few questions to you. April?
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be with this wonderful panel today. My name is April Gu. I'm currently a professor in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Cornell University in the United States. I'm also a member of Axon Sustainability Center for the Future. Before I joined academia, I was a process engineer and worked in the industry in both developing countries in China as well as the United States for 5 to 6 years. So I do appreciate the different aspect and angle, particularly to water issue from industry as well as from university. Thank you.
Thank you very much, April. And thank you very much for your additional contribution to this one. I think to have somebody who was involved with the 2015 one, and this one is also very incredible. The question really I'm going to put across is water quality is discussed as part of the report, and so is the fact that business case can change if one does not require full treatment. Is there enough activities in the area to make real progress at cost that customers will find beneficial to accelerate? April?
Thank you, Nelson, for the question. I think I'm going to probably address this more from a technology angle. And of course, is understand that all water issues is tangled with social, economic, many other aspects. And from a technological angle, I think in addition to the continuing efforts to further improve our efficiency from infrastructure, leaking, piping detection, and aging structure improvement, treatment technology innovations, but I think we also recognize there's some major philosophical shift in the framework. How do we do water delivery, especially related to water quality and the water quantity? So one, for example, the shift from centralized treatment, which is driven mostly by economical engineering. You get cheaper by larger volume, larger treatment plant. So major pipeline guide all wastewater or water to a central place. Now we're moving to the shift to decentralized treatment and accompanied by multi-level customized local demand-based treatment. And that would actually facilitate more easier, more efficient local energy recovery, resources recovery, as well as water reuse. And along with that, also, of course, demanding for a suite of enabling technologies allow us to treat from not only the source separation, instead treating all wastewater to drinking water level and use for whatever purpose, but we don't need to do that. We have to reevaluate. Do we have to treat it to the level, depending if you're really for land irrigation, toilet flushing? So we have to separate the source from beginning, such the intelligent toilet already in pilot in many countries. You can separate feces from urine allow more efficient downstream treatment and resources recovery. And all those efforts are going on to allow us to do more specific targeted treatment. And at the same time, we also recognize that there are also more challenges evolving with this notion, with this philosophical paradigm shift in the entire water quality delivering. For example, as we promoting more continuum from wastewater all the way to now drinking water and water reuse, as well as encourage the water quality issue, but the water quantity issue, but the water quality now is facing issues such as emerging contaminants would be recycled and concentrated while using more water reuse, as well as, for example, some of the technology we recognize that can deliver disinfection, allow reuse water quality improvement to meet the customer needs. But we also recognize some of the technology actually leading to new issues such as antibiotic resistance can caused by not only antibiotics, but now by disinfection byproducts. So there are a lot of new, really exciting, but more challenges emerging as well. And I think with that, I put a pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see you're very much on your soapbox. That is an area of expertise. I really like the way you step into technology side and using that as a technology as a solution enabler. I really love that. I suspect from your position as a professor, it's natural that I will ask this question, won't I? How can university help the like of FIDIC or engineers and stakeholders to come together and share information to improve progress? This is very important, and the perception of the water value. I mean, how can universities like Cornell help the industry work together in a more collaborative way?
I think all educators, probably not only university, even beyond university, are all asking ourselves, how do we train the next generation engineer and scientist to be able to provide a more feasible and innovative solutions to the more and more larger scale, more complex environmental issues, such as water issues. I think personally myself, I noticed several major changes. One is that the curriculum design and education philosophy are pushing students from just separated individual discipline silos and barriers to allow universities to give easy opportunity for all students to access multidiscipline, different wider context of the technology skills that they are learning. I think we are seeing that improvement in university settings and curriculum. For example, in Cornell, we no longer recruit PhD students as a discipline. We recruit them as a field, a wider range of field across all disciplines. You choose whoever can be your advisor on campus. And that's a true example to demonstrate that. And the second, I think also through the education curriculum, we're also put more emphasis on promoting industrial and community engagement to really allow students not only just learn solid grasp of the fundamental technology, but understand the context and for short-term and long-term and the future needs. And within the bigger picture, what are the other needs and knowledges the student need to know to better improve themselves to be more fitted future providers, engineer, and scientists to contribute to the society. And the very last, we also recognize with the next generation of new industrial revolution with AI, with information technology, with social media, and that's a big wealth of platforms can engage all the new universities to allow us to effectively communicate updated new progress in the science technology to the community, as well as to learn from the community what are the needs that's more tangible for us to put in the curriculum.
Well, it's funny that April, you've just if I have to describe, I think you just hammer it. Because I think it's important that the issue about education and how the education work with industry is very much brought to home. I'm really pleased about that. April, I'm going to come back to you later on. Jessica, I think it's important that I actually bring you into play. I mean, as one of our future leaders, you've been active within FIDIC. So would you do a quick introduction, and I've got one or two questions for you. Jessica?
Thank you, Nelson. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. It's also really fantastic to have been a co-contributor to the report. I am a civil engineer, and I've got about 13 years of experience in water and wastewater engineering. And this has primarily been in the consulting engineering sector in South Africa. And I've had a long history with CISA, FIDIC Africa, and FIDIC. So it's really fantastic to be here.
So, with that introduction, I'm sure there's a lot of aspiring people as they say, how did Jessica get to that point? Well, my goal and FIDIC goal is to make sure we encourage the future leaders to be the leaders in future. So, Jessica, you're in the right place. I mean, I suspect, a question I'm going to put shouldn't surprise you. In your contribution, like Peter did, you talk about the importance of tomorrow's engineer, the future, I suspect, and the fact that, sustainability will not be only a consideration, but a core part of the approach that we need to adopt in the future. What would you, talk about the engineering need help in tomorrow's, and how do we achieve that outcome if we are going to, make this move? Graham started by saying we haven't got that much time left. Okay, we've lost a lot of time for all sorts of reasons. So we are now on super critical path to deliver. So how do we get the young people involved in our future and make sure we have a sustainable solution? Jessica?
Thanks, Nelson. So we talk about the decade of action, but as Graham pointed out, that decade is whittling down really fast. I think that we're already quite a socially and environmentally conscious generation. And I think we're cultivating that for future generations of engineers that are coming into industry. But what we also understand is that with technology, social media, with access to information, we've never been as connected as we are right now. And we know that the world is talking about water. We know that as a sector, we're talking about water, but we're not necessarily talking about the right things. And when I say we're not talking about the right things, is that it's partly connected to us creating an enabling environment. And we need to ask ourselves, what would that picture of this enabling environment look like? And whilst we have everyone operating in their silos, doing what they've done historically, when we talk about us needing to be able to put sustainability at the center of what it is that we do, it's I would essentially break it down into three things. One is that we need to be able to cultivate appropriate skills and do the appropriate capacity building that gets us away from just being the generalists and into the depth of specialization, as April said earlier, depth of specialization, and then to also be able to appreciate the breadth of understanding of the connection of all of these elements and how they connect to each other. I think another part of an enabling environment is really being able to align academia, research, training, and then project learning. Because what we have is some really great things happening on the research front and some very innovative things that happen in industry. But being able to put these two things together is really that essential link between what future leaders do and see. And I think that where we understand the complexities, particularly in areas with significant water stress, that the appropriate use of water needs to match its ultimate end goal. And being able to bring all of that through really requires us to be able to transition from the way we think of traditional gray infrastructure in terms of how we bridge that into green and blue infrastructure, how we bring gray infrastructure into nature-based solutions. And that's something that our textbooks are not going to tell us. Those are the things that we need to be able to do from an observation perspective. So I'm going to leave it there, Nelson.
Thank you very much for that. I think I'm glad that you made the connection back into technology, and the young ones are really driving that. The other point I was going to put across to you, you mentioned in the report that the challenges are far and wide, and that water is becoming an increasing threat and limited into resources. How does this affect the business case for change? And from the young people point of view, how will that impact the future in terms of how we drive things forward? Jessica?
So in terms of how we drive things forward, I think that one of the really key things is for us to understand that what we need right now is for us to have foresight, for us to have energy, for us to really have that initiative, and ultimately creativity, because nothing that we need to do is new. There isn't something that's out there that we don't already know. It's being able to connect the dots on all these things that really make sense. And for us to be able to do this, one of the key things that I think that we need to have, and that's echoing what Graham said, is the sense of urgency. and also being able to look at the circularity of water. Now, we often think that in dealing with water and in dealing with our infrastructure projects, we often look at ourselves exactly where we are. Now, I come from based in South Africa. We have our own set of challenges. The report talks very nicely to how we looked at averting day zero, but the reality of a lack of access to water, the reality around being able to deal with the circularity around water is that we do need to be able to bring in the balance of our thinking, but also to be able to bring in things like our considerations for partnerships, collaboration, to being able to look just apart from just the traditional things around financing, around technology selection. It's being able to pull out of those things together.
Thanks very much, Jessica, for that. I think it was quite interesting. I'll be quite happy to come back to Jessica. I want to go to Natalie at this point. Natalie, you are involved with Sustainability Development Committee, and you've appeared here before. Would you do a quick introduction? Then I've got 2 questions to fire across to you. I'm sure you're ready to go. Natalie.
Hi, Nelson, and hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Muir. I'm General Manager for Water and Environment at Cardno. I'm based in Australia. I've been sort of around the water and wastewater industry for about 20 odd years, which sometimes I say, if you say it quickly, it doesn't sound quite so bad. But anyway, I guess a mix of experience between working for water utilities, but I spent the last 15 odd years in the consulting sector.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for that. I mean, the question is very much about operation side of it. I'm going to ask the question, how do we engage customers to better understand the value of the sustainability agenda and environmental aspect of water, and not just what comes out of the tap or the pipe, but what as much is needed and what is happening? Natalie, what's your take on that?
Yeah, Nelson, look, I think, there is some really good work that actually happens in this space in terms of engaging customers and getting their feedback and their views and all those sorts of things. But there's probably not enough of it that happens in a lot of places. And even, I guess, as we said earlier, whether we've actually got the messaging right as to the conversations that we're having with our customers. Obviously based in Australia, we're a land of drought and flooding rains, and even over the last month or so, we've actually seen prime examples of that. But during the millennium drought here in Brisbane, water was the absolute topic of conversation. You couldn't get into a taxi or go get your hair cut or do anything without having a conversation with someone at your friend's barbecue, just to talk about water and the issues around water security. So, that was actually saw some really great behavioural change for us. Fortunately, some of that has been sustained, some has rebounded a little bit as people obviously forget about the drought and think about new things. But we need to really, I guess, sustain those conversations and absolutely amp it up. I think in the water industry, it's an industry where a lot of those customer interactions happen when something goes wrong, unfortunately. So it's when people turn on the tap and there's no water, or there's poor water quality, or there's a blockage in the sewage system. But we really need to change that discussion, I think, and be a bit more proactive about the importance of water, and not just water when it comes out of the tap and what happens in a water utility, but as Graham was saying earlier, some of the embedded water in the food that we eat and the products that we buy and all those sorts of things. I guess from a water industry perspective, there's a couple of good examples in Australia I can kind of share, I guess, about the community side of things. And, there's a water utility down in Melbourne who's actually formed a citizens jury, and they provide recommendations into their regulatory price submission. So that citizens jury were actually asked about how to help find a balance between price and service, which is fair to all. So, that's a really good example of where you're actually getting that feedback directly into what a utility spends and what their pricing should look like. And I've also personally been involved in a project not too far from here where more on the community consultation side of things, but we had a community that worked completely against a wastewater treatment plant. And now we actually have a community that's really supportive of the environmental centre that's being constructed, which includes wetland, it includes walking paths. And of course, along the way, that whole community reference group have learned a whole lot more about wastewater treatment. So taking those opportunities to really educate the public and bring them along for the journey, I think is really important. And just finally, I guess, just touch on that last week was World Water Week. Was World Water Day on the 22nd of March. And the theme was all about what does water mean to you? I saw a video that was posted on LinkedIn through the Asian Development Bank, and they quoted Dr. Sylvia Earle, I think it was, who's an oceanographer. And it says, no water, no life, no blue, no green. And I think, that just completely sums it up. Water is fundamental to everything we do, and it's really fundamental to sustainability. So we've got to try and get it right.
Good point to finish on that. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll probably put one to you before I move across to Miguel. And as you know, the COVID has caused a lot of new thinking in the industry. People are saying people are moving away from city and moving into the urban area. And the question is, how do you think the COVID may impact, how people value water in the future? Do you see a shift coming through that? Or what's your take on that? Very quickly, Martin.
Yeah, look, as Bill touched on earlier, I think we do have a real great opportunity with COVID. It's brought around people's awareness to the environment and the impact that we have. But equally, I think COVID potentially means a shift in terms of where people are living. April touched on the decentralized solutions, which, I completely agree, I think provide a greater opportunity in that water recycling space and those opportunities to potentially have that close connection. Someone that lives on a rural property and has a rainwater tank and an on-site wastewater treatment system, I can tell you they're pretty on to what they need to do in order to live sustainably and to manage the water that they do. So hopefully out of COVID, the conversation about sustainability, the conversation about the environment, and potentially also the shift in terms of where our people might live may actually give us some opportunities to really kind of change the conversation about water as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm going to come back to you, Natalie Aseba. Miguel, for me to introduce you, Miguel Moderator, you from TIPSA. Can I give you the floor to do a very quick introduction? And I've got a couple of questions to get us going. I'm waiting for the question to come from the floor. So Miguel, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me to this interesting webinar. Well, my background is civil engineering. I have a PhD in environmental management. Well, for 10 years, I worked as a professor at the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain. Now I work as Chief Technology Officer at TIPSA, so I deal mainly with technological issues, innovation within the firm. And as a professional engineer, I have always worked in the field of water planning, mainly in Europe and Latin America. So I will be very happy to share some lessons learned from my experience with all of you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. It's good to have you. I hope all is well with you and the rest of TIPSA team in Spain. Obviously, you are the Chief Technology Officer, and you did say, from your background that you've had a lot of time as a professor. The question for me is build on what April said earlier about the technology side. I think the business case for water is significant. We know that, but technology is always, changing. The question is, what innovative technologies do you see that is coming across that we can actually put to help the individual, the industry, the client, so that we can have a better value for water? What's your take on that? Okay.
Well, we talk about innovation and our priorities here in Europe with a vision to be greener, more digital, more resilient, and to be prepared for future challenges, including climate change. We have talked about decentralized systems, for instance. We need innovation towards circular economy, reuse of treated water, valorization of water treatment and sludge, production of biogas. Obviously, we need innovation to make systems more energy efficient and to use renewable energy. We need to understand better nature-based systems. We need to use sustainable drainage systems in our cities. These are all also for constructed wetlands. We need innovation to deal with microplastics pollutions in the oceans. That's clear. That's what we see. But I would venture to say that the greatest need for innovation and action is in the field of governance. Appropriate regulatory frameworks, more efficient organizations, trained human resources, education. Technology can also support governance. There is a lot of innovation to be done there. We need metering, monitoring systems, digital information management systems. There's a lot to be done in the engineering and construction side. And I will just say 2 points. We need regarding technology, we need open source and interoperable systems, and we need to support the deployment of that technology with training and resources to make sure that this is sustainable.
So I like that open source and interoperability system. That sounds like a very good buzzword. I've used that word in technology, in systems, so I'm really glad that's coming into that. The next question I have for you really is looking at, in the report, we talk about the case for installing new infrastructure in countries that requires new infrastructure through upgrading existing infrastructure in ways we can monitor and reduce waste. So how do we ensure that the lessons from country to country, for example, are being taken across and being used in different areas?
Well, this is a very wide question. Well, my experience deals with the adoption of the Water Framework Directive in Europe 20 years ago. I will talk a little bit about that because I think that's interesting, that the Water Framework Directive in Europe introduced an interesting approach. It included a wide range of economic concepts to improve water resources management. The Article 9 requires all member states to take account of the principle of recovery of the costs. And the goal is that water pricing policies should provide incentives to use water in an efficient way, and thereby contributing to the environmental objectives. The directive is an environmental standard. And after 20 years of implementation, we have seen a lot of things. The first thing is that the directive has served to systematize all the economic analysis and to bring all economic indicators to the table. That's important. We have seen also that quantification of environmental and resource cost is a complex task. What is the cost of turning a shallow lake into a eutrophic lake? That would take 50 years to recover. I mean, that's a difficult question. And we have seen that in some demands, some water uses show a low price elasticity, which means that pricing instruments are less efficient to reduce usage to get to the optimal point. So one lesson that I will highlight: water management strategies need to find the right mix of pricing and non-pricing instruments. And there's a lot of engineering to be done there. River basin management plans, monitoring, control, good agricultural practices, etc.
Thank you very much on that. While I've got you on, before I go back into others, I want to put it back to you, Miguel. Before you go, I just want to put the third question to you because I'll go back to Peter later on. The business case and perceived value of water is very different in different countries, in different development. Where we're likely to occur in food and water? The question that I have is, how do we link the business case for water to reduce such issue? How do we deal with rates in places where economics are not always clear enough, to incentivize investment? How do we address that in different parts of the country? Miguel?
Okay, here I will talk about my experience in Latin America. There, almost 90% of the water utilities have adopted an increasing block tariff scheme. Okay. You know, that kind of scheme penalizes excessive use of water. One problem is that these schemes provide, let's say, an incentive for the expansion of water networks to areas of high consumption. We extend the network to the hotels, but not to poor neighborhoods. That happens. Sometimes we see that households with fewer resources are often those with the greatest number of cohabitants, and they need more water. And the system doesn't help for that. In the region, we see, in Latin America, we see a high use of cross subsidies in the region. Some countries prefer direct subsidies. This is very important. Sometimes this is managed by municipal social services. It's a complex task and very important, and it's working in many countries in Latin America. But I would say one important point. The level of water tariffs in Latin America is quite high compared with what we see in other countries, quite high. However, we see that most utilities are not covering the cost and even the operational cost. So that means that we have a problem of efficiency in the operation. And that's what we have to put our work. We need to reduce the levels of non-revenue water. My friend Tipsa is working in Costa Rica with the goal of going from 53% of non-revenue water, which is quite high, to 36%. Going beyond is difficult, and there's a lot of engineering to be done again with that goal. I would say that our preferred strategy there is to improve micrometering.
And that seems to work most of the time. Can I come back to Peter now? Peter, I mean, we've had the issue about education and in its widest context. The question I was going to put across, you did mention in your report that, that contribution that engineers cannot fulfill their wider role unless they are trained and educated more broadly to cover issue of governance, finance, social responsibility, environmental awareness. So the question is this happening enough? Is the sector starting to think along this way? And how can education institution and the like of FIDIC support in that agenda, Peter?
Well, it's a very important area, and some of the other panelists have already alluded to it. And of course, there are encouraging signs in places like Cornell, and Professor Gu has made that point well, but we are still assuming as a society, I think, that engineers will do what society decides, and then engineers are given the brief against which they operate. And I feel very strongly, and always have done, that engineers have a much greater responsibility to take ownership of the basis on which the decisions are being made. We are not technologists alone. We are uniquely well placed to understand the implications of the decisions that are made on our behalf, which we then implement. And so that has hugely wide implications, because it means that the people we want to attract to become engineers is a broader spectrum than we currently look for. And courses, very excellent courses like the one at Cambridge University, which of course covers all of the disciplines of engineering in the single degree, still really look for people who are technically outstanding and brilliant, but spend nothing like enough time concentrating on those non-technical dimensions of governance, sustainability, environmental awareness, social responsibility, and so on. And as long as that continues, we will continue to be secondary to the decision-making around many issues related to where engineering has a greater significance. In a sense, engineering got us into the difficulties that we currently face with climate change, but only engineering can get us out of it. And we need to take much, much greater responsibility for this and seize this moment, because without us, we are lost.
Well, Peter, you put out your word in it, and I think I remember, April, you did touch on this earlier on. I know you focus on technology and you look at how we monitor and all of that, but let me build on the question that I put across to Peter. I hear that engineers need to be more holistic. They need to think not just purely in the literal science of just being an engineer, but we need to think in the lateral sense. Governance is very important. Do you think there is a sufficient dialogue between the academic world, such as Cornell, and the industry to bring a better partnership so that we have engineers well positioned, not just to be on the recipient end, but to be somebody who can be in the thought leadership thinking side? April, what was your take? April, are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. Thank you, Nelson, for the question. And Peter, thank you for the point. I cannot agree more with you on that. Perhaps I think it's more effective for me to answer this probably with a very specific example to really demonstrate the point we're discussing here. A number of years ago, I was leading a national effort to evaluate the technology we needed in states to deliver wastewater effluent phosphorus concentration less than 5 microgram per liter. I know this is a technical form, but the point I'm making is the EPA regulation on wastewater effluent is total phosphorus, disregard the speciation as well as the bioavailability, which is intent of the regulation to control eutrophication, right? And as we did that technology survey, provided a big report on wide range of technology can deliver to that level. However, if you look at the TEA and the LCA assessment, you realize that the overall cost and environmental sustainability impact factor is orders magnitude higher than the teeny bit eutrophication reduction you gain by use all that fancy technology we provided and evaluated. And as a consequence, as you can take ownership driver of this. So I believe at that time, I volunteered to give out a second report. I told the engineer, we need to get all together, talk to EPA. It's no longer a technology issue. It is a philosophical regulation, social responsibility. Are we addressing this phosphorus issue from a global major system gain rather than local gain, but overall loss? So I think that example demonstrates exactly that point we're discussing.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Peter.
Absolutely. I think that was a very sustained means. I think you build on what Peter started off with in a very, very pragmatic way. Thank you very much for that. And I like that. I may have to use that. Jessica, let me bring you back on to it. I mean, significant progress for water investment for things such as universal provision, wastewater, environmental improvement, etc. are required in developing world. You know that, I know that. Yet the business case and potential costs and crisis we face is global. So how do we work to approach such a challenge in a global basis, looking at it from the perspective of being the future leader? Because you keep saying to us, the future is down to you guys. So I want to know your view on how you think we can resolve that issue. Jessica?
Well, we get 5 minutes to solve all of the problems. I think just one of the key things is that as Peter mentioned earlier, we said that our favorite Albert Einstein says that we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. So when we think universal access, often the thing that doesn't come to mind is our end user, our beneficiary, and the level of service that person will ultimately receive. And I think that we talk about these big issues, and when we think developing countries, we think developing nations and the needs that we have. We often need to also think about how the vulnerability is impacted when we put forward solutions that are not appropriate for what our people require. So in some ways, the way in which we will be able to bridge this is to be able to think around solutions for people and the environment, not at people and the environment. And then the second thing that I'd like to also bring about is we had this conversation around this food, water, energy nexus. And when we think about the proportion of food and raw materials that are circulating our globe, quite a lot of it comes from developing countries. And when we think about what happens in one place that relates to water and how it affects another place and when it relates to water, is that we're all interconnected. And the UN has this principle of leaving no one behind. And ultimately, universal access is all of our problems, irrespective of where we sit, at what level of service we receive. It really means that at the heart of it all, us as the custodians of the infrastructure, the resources, and as professionals, it really does come down to us to bring those level of creativity and that level of innovation through everything, irrespective of money and where finance will come from.
Thanks very much, Jessica. I expected nothing but exactly the same sort of response. I'm going to go Natalie now and build on what Jessica said. If the question I have for you, Natalie, is if by 2025 we get to the point where we know that we cannot deliver the sustainability development goals that has been set, what do you think that we can do to create a global solution? I mean, this is $65 million question, Natalie. Graham,
yeah, we'll see if we can solve that one in 5 minutes.
Graham said it at the beginning. He said he's going to give you the task to find the solution. So come 2025, we know for sure that we fail. We cannot. So what should we be doing globally from the sustainability development point so that we can rally around the industry, not to think in silo? This is the key point, not to think in silo, but think in a holistic manner, in a system manner, in a sort of a approach where we find a solution. What is your take?
Thanks, Nelson. So, look, I mean, I guess firstly, we can't wait till 2025. I think there's enough evidence and there's enough reports out there at the moment that are telling us that we're way off track from meeting the SDGs. So, you know, I read something that before COVID, there wasn't a single country that was on track to meet the goals. There was another one that in 2019 said that we are 43 years behind schedule in terms of meeting the goal. So unless we can find an amazing project manager that's going to catch up on that sort of a delay, I think we've got to start to really have a bit of a call to arms now. And, you know, as an engineering industry, I think Peter said it sort of before, you know, it's the policymakers that'll create the policies and the frameworks to help us, you know, create the change, but we're the ones that are actually going to be enacting it. And as an industry, we've really got to try and take that that opportunity. The Sustainable Development Committee of FIDIC have actually put in a couple of applications to COP later this year. So we're hopeful that we'll have the opportunity to participate in some forums with some of our partners to hopefully influence that conversation. But I think it comes down to, and we talked about it even in the first webinar, I guess, about making sure that that whole sustainability piece comes very early in the value chain. So we can talk about how we make solutions more sustainable as we're constructing them, but we'll get far more value and we'll get far more change if we start talking about sustainable solutions when we're looking to solve an issue or a need. So I think it's really about trying to make sure that, you know, we are being very holistic about what it is that we're looking for. And once the need's identified, let's get all of the right people around the table. Let's talk to all the different disciplines. Let's get our customers, let's get the community, let's get all the stakeholders involved, and let's try and come up with the right sustainable solution right at that front end. And that's going to lead to a much better outcome further down the track and start to make some real change.
Thank you. Nice.
Nelson, could I jump into this with Natalie
Bill,
just for a moment?
You have the license to jump in anytime.
Okay, well, just quickly, I'd like to just expand on what Natalie just said. Natalie is leading a very important committee for FIDIC, the Sustainable Development Committee, and we really want that committee to help us all get the word out to groups like COP and others about what engineers really can do to help address some of these huge problems. And thank you, Natalie, for taking the leadership in that, and you're spot on in terms of the direction we want to go on. So I will go back to mute now, Nelson.
Thanks, Bill. I'll never ask you to go into mute. That would be disrespectful. I'll never do that. Thanks very much to all my panelists. At this point in time, there's a lot of questions coming through from the floor, and I'll try and pick them as I can. I'll start with the easy one. And this is really from me. I think I'll take the MC prerogative on that and throw the very first question to Peter. Peter, I know that, you know, part of the things we talk about sustainability is also issue about resilience of our, you know, asset base. And I know you are heavily involved at Cambridge University in resilience and what Lloyd is doing in terms of sustainability and big agenda on big infrastructure. Does this subject appear on your radar with what you are doing in your research on the Lloyds and all the resilient issue? Does the issue about water, does it really come up, you know, as to the value of water? Peter, where are you?
Yeah, yes, very specifically, water is probably not being picked on because we're not trying to pick on individual utilities, but we're trying to look at the issues around resilience. But one thing that has emerged is that resilience is a more accessible language for engineers than sustainable development. And it can be used, I think, as a Trojan horse for getting engineers on side. Thinking about resilience allows them to think about deep uncertainty. It allows them to readdress probability and risk in a different way. And once you've got them, once engineers are thinking in that way around the topic of resilience, it's a much shorter step to get out into the sustainable development agenda using very much the same sort of techniques of consideration of uncertainty and the ability of systems, particularly systems and systems of systems, to be able to respond to unknown or unprecedented shocks, one of which, of course, is climate change. And what is interesting is that climate change is all about, and all of the language around the widespread conversation in the world is around carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions, which causes climate change. And there's much less awareness of one of the impacts of climate change, which is in the whole suite of water sectors, because that's where, as it were, that's where the impacts are most acutely felt. And water is in a way of explaining the dire consequences of climate change and the need to focus much more aggressively on the sustainable development goals.
Well, Peter, I'm not going to let you off the hook in the sense that, what you are saying to me is that the financial institution and the world of insurance knows that they need to speak a language that gets engineers excited to find a solution. And likewise, the message I'm getting from everybody here is that also engineers need to learn the language to help in such a way that we are not at the receiving end, but we are really at the vanguard of the policy making so that we can have a sustainable solution. So that's my takeaway. I'm going to start picking questions from the floor. And Peter, don't be surprised if I come back to you and say to Natalie and Tracy, who are in Sustainability Development Group, that they need your talent, your brain. So I'll be coming across to you. So the first question is from Adriana Sapova. And actually, this is a question for Bill. This will get you excited. Bill, and Andrea said, has the FIDIC board considered starting an FCL certification program for FIDIC certified sustainable expert? I think this will be in demand. Bill, what's your take on that?
Well, the quick answer is yes. Well, one of the major initiatives we have underway is to dramatically improve our training programs and attach certification to those training programs. And sustainability is huge on our agenda. It's one of our 3 pillars. So I think looking with the Sustainable Development Committee, getting input from them, I think that is an area where we can do more than what we are doing. Having said that, however, we really do need to be a little bit careful as FIDIC because we're a professional organization and we don't want to imply that we are, quote, technical in any way. So I think we just need to be careful about structuring that kind of approach. But yes, it's definitely something that we're looking at very strongly.
Okay, thanks. I think I take the first answer you said, Bill. You said it's absolutely yes, but we need to be careful. Caveat. So I got your first question. There's a caveat that goes with that. Andy's being good and he's feeding me with a lot of questions. Next question. I'm not sure whether it is a question or it's a comment from Jeff North. He said, striking a balance, and he's put it in uppercase. He's trying to tell me something. Striking a balance is not the way forward. Creativity and innovation is how. And so how are you going to ensure people have access to clean water without jeopardizing the ecosystem upon which all life depends? You are in the prime position to lead this external dilemma. So who wants to address that? Should we just take that as part of life, or is it something that we want to address? Jessica, what's your take?
A difficult one, but our clients see us as their trusted advisors. And I think that whilst there is no silver bullet for any of these problems, or Graham would have solved it when he pulled all of these things together, I think that we need to appreciate that whilst we operate as professionals, we try to operate in a financially sustainable environment, and we try to do the right thing. And I think that one of the things that's really key, and we talked about changing our thinking away from just sustainability into more resilience, we also have the challenge of thinking more adaptation and pulling all of those things together when we receive a brief from a client, or you receive an appointment, or you're bidding on a project. I think that that's key for where we put solutions forward, because a client will ask for what they know, but we can put forward for what they need. And I think that that's really the key between an average engineer and the best engineers.
Jessica, I think the word about the difference between what they need and what they know is a big one. And the issue about trusted advisor is something that I'm going to hold you down to, because I know that's pet subject for Bill. Now, Bill, there's a specific question here for you, if I get it right. And actually it says, I think he just jumped through it. So Bill Howard mentioned the SDG number 3 on climate change. How are you going to embody what it means to put people and planet over profit? Or will you exacerbate the water crisis by embodying the very behavior that brought it to them in the first place? Do we put people over the profit? That's a big question. Peter, do you want to take that? Or Bill?
I'm going to wait.
Well, go ahead, Peter. Well, I can, sure, I can, do my part on it. Climate change and the water impact because of climate change is absolutely huge. So they're intimately connected, and they're making matters worse and worse and worse. And we need to communicate what these problems are, but we also need to help governments attack the problem early before they even see the problem. And one of the examples that come to mind, if I understand the question, is what's going on with the melting of glaciers, particularly in the rivers in the Asia, India area. Right now, flooding is causing problems, causing damage. It's causing people, to lose crops and that kind of thing. That's what's happening now. 20 or 30 years from now, when the glaciers go away, there won't be any water at all. So it's a long-term problem, but it's something that we really need to get at. So I'm not sure I'm really addressing the question well, but what we can do is things like we are doing right now, and that is trying our best to communicate the needs to audiences beyond just engineers. So, Peter, I don't know if you want to pick up on that, or
Peter, do you want to add on to that? Because I've got a question coming to Peter. Yeah.
I was only going to say that I think that the mechanisms we use for measuring the way in which we make decisions are beginning to be shown to be inadequate, because economics doesn't deliver for us anything like a kind of future proofing because of the social discount rate that we apply. So really capital intensive projects, which have very low running costs and very low environmental consequences over a long lifetime, are completely lost to us because of a discount rate at 3 or 3.5%, which only values the first 10 or 15 years of their lifetime. So you can talk about TOTEX, but if you include a discount rate, anything above about 0.5%, you're still distorting the picture in terms of what would be a truly sustainable solution.
All right, thanks, Peter. There's a question for Peter, but I'm going to put it to Peter and also April, because I think both of you are very much in. The first question is that, Peter and Tel, given that water is the source of life, how do you intend to routinely price, the social cost of water challenges when life is so priceless? How do you intend to price the cost of water challenges when life itself is so, priceless? Is that
it sounds difficult to comment or challenge that life is priceless, but actually all life is priced. The way in which we deliver infrastructure assesses life's value, particularly in my area is more in transport and in road design. We price road safety measures according to the cost of a death. And so it's not possible to get away from the fact that there is a connection between the level of investment and the level of risk we're prepared to accept associated with any form of infrastructure. Having said that, I think we need to take a view that there are non-negotiable minima which we need to deliver to the natural environment before we start to exploit the resource. In this case that we're talking about is water, so that there is a point below which we will not go in terms of leaving water available to what we generally call the natural environment. And that is a very difficult conversation with economists, because in strict economic terms, that would not be a starting point.
Thank you. The second part of the question, I'm going to put it to April. And the question is, how can FIDIC or engineer be the agent of change by ensuring that water projects as written could be followed by requests for counter proposal that will do less harm and have better outcome? In other words, do we literally take everything that the client tells us and just provide their solution? Or do we really engage them in such a way that we can educate them to provide the right solution that will deliver what we need? April, what's your take on that subject?
Thank you, Nelson, for the question. I think that's also a pretty big question. I probably also like to use one specific example to express what my overall sense on that. For example, the drinking water treatment nowadays, one particular issue we call the emerging issue is a recognition of constant balanced battle between use disinfection to control the pathogen waterborne diseases, which COVID now is playing in that context, and as well as the growing evidence building that the disinfection process itself generates so many carcinogens and different byproducts, now leading antibiotic resistance. So this is both health issue, and you have to balance between tackle it between. And I think as we move along, we learned that the regulation move on one end and then will lead to issues with the other. For example, the regulated DBPs now turn out to be actually causing unexpected, unknown toxic effects they didn't previously recognize. So I think that's the issue we continue have to communicate, I guess, communicate across all stakeholders. And I also want to touch upon a little bit what Peter said earlier, the opportunity and the risk loss. And I think there is also rising recognition, a lot of diseases, cancers, and there's a clear evidence now, there's association of that with water pollutants beyond just genetic predisposition, susceptibility geographically. And all those pointing to the value of water has to be really priced beyond just the cost related to transportation, the treatment. There are many other need to be considered.
Thank you very much, April. Can I come to Miguel now? One of the questions before I call Bill. Bill, I think you get ready with your 5 bullet points to summarize. I'm going to call the question from the floor from a guy called Oe Martin. I'm not sure whether I pronounced your name correctly. And this is an ethical aspect. It says, should we as engineers participate, e.g. in building dams, which are highly controversial in terms of the battle for water, or in an expense of aborigine or something like that?
Okay, local communities. No?
Do you understand the question of that? Can
Yeah.
you repeat that question, Miguel?
Okay, well, thank you. It's an interesting question. I mean, I think that the engineers, we should be trusted advisors. This is on the table today, and that's an important message. We are not pro dams. We are not against dams. We should see dams as a tool to solve a problem. As an engineers, we need to understand the benefits, and we need to make sure that that project solves the problem and the benefits are shared with all communities, with the stakeholders within the basin through an integrated approach. So that's our role there, to make sure that the benefits are shared, and that's it mainly. We at the end we see that we have an ethical concern about that project. I mean, we should not participate.
Okay. So the issue that's been, I think I got the question is, do we compromise, ethical issue against, having to damage aborigines and all their, land? And I think that point is absolutely say we are a trusted advisor and we have an obligation to make sure we do what is sustainable. At this point in time, I think we probably have 1 or 2 comments that I'm going to put across to all the panelists before I bring Bill in. So I'm going to start off, Peter, because I think you started. And to me is that this paper or this report is being put out as a second or first in the 2 that is going to come through. And if there's anything that we've picked up in the conversation about valuing water and the business case, one sentence that you want to leave with us in this particular conversation to move on? And I'm going to ask the same question with others, so you have opportunity to think about it before I bring Bill into it. So Peter, what would be your guiding statement for us and for the industry as a whole as to the way forward? Peter?
Well, just to be awkward, I would say that the thing that comes most strongly out of this conversation is that engineers through FIDIC, consultants through FIDIC, should be kicking the door in of political decision makers to make themselves heard more clearly.
Thank you very much, Peter. Jessica?
I'm going to take a leaf from Peter's book and say that, like the energy sector, there's firms that have taken a stance against energy into a carbon-intensive development. And as engineers who are in the water, we need to take a stand against potentially damaging projects and those that don't embody an ESG agenda.
Thank you very much. April, the same question to you.
I would say, unless we put proper value on water in such a way can move the paradigm shift towards sustainability, there will be no future.
Thank you. Can I go across? Natalie?
Look, I think, Nelson, we've all sort of talked tonight that it's a fairly large problem that we need to try and solve, but I think the engineering community, it's part of what we need to do. So we'll solve it, I think, through a bit of creativity, a bit of innovation, a whole lot of collaboration, and taking that real holistic approach to approaching water and water as it feeds into the broader sustainability discussion.
Okay, thank you. Miguel?
Well, I will say that, I mean, the technology can play a role. There is a huge need of innovation and creativity, but I would say that the greatest need for innovation and to address our challenges is in the field of governance. And there's a lot of engineering and science to be done there.
Thank you very much. Graham, you've been quiet. I'm going to ask you, what's your one take that you want to leave? Listen to everybody.
I'd leave people on the value of water to remember that there's the individual value, there's the societal value, and behaviors drive those. And when people talk about pricing and cost, remember there is profit, which is what people generally look at in a narrow sense, but there's economic profit. That in terms looks at what you could have done with it otherwise and includes the problems that we're talking about. So don't just look at profit and look at individuals. You need to look at individuals, how they connect to society, how that leads to behaviors, and what else we could do with it. That's where you start to derive the value.
Thank you very much, Bill. At this point, I think I'm going to go. I take it that, Barbara, I've got 2 polls coming through before I call Bill in. So would you be kind to put the first poll that comes up? Barbara, would you be able to do that? Thank you very much. The first poll is, we have 3197 days to meet the water SDG. Do you think we can achieve that? Yes or no? Time to vote. Do you think we can achieve that? 3197 days to meet the water SDG. Do you think we can achieve that? Yes or no? Can we have the result, please? 68% said no. So we have a real challenge. So Bill, it's my honor to get you back on and to give us your word of wisdom as we wrap up. Bill?
Thank you, Nelson, and thank you all speakers for a fantastic webinar on a very complex subject called the water challenges that we face. I think we've talked about some of the major things that we as an engineering community can and should be doing to address this huge challenge. I think, as April said, if we do not succeed or make better progress, we won't be around. And that's a pretty sobering thought. We heard a lot about the need for engineers to reach out beyond their technical community, particularly with influencing government. And one of the thoughts that I have in that connection is the need for engineers to get involved in some of these complex challenges extremely early. I've heard it said many times that sometimes that the best engineering is often done at the very, very preliminary stage when the projects are being developed, and we have the opportunity to be innovative and also to make sure that whatever project or expenditure is going to be made, that they address more than just one challenge, that we address as many challenges as possible with each project, and that we absolutely make sure that in doing one project, we don't cause another problem. Some of those concepts, they're easy to say, but they're difficult to do. But the way that it gets done is through dialogue with government and other stakeholders. I think what Natalie mentioned that's going on in Australia, or I think Melbourne you mentioned, where you get the community involved. And in order for engineers to do that, they need to be trusted advisors. We've heard that term a number of times. But in order for us to be trusted advisors, we need to be really good at communicating. And I thank the speakers today. You set a great example in how to communicate. And a couple of you are teaching our younger people, which is I find very, very encouraging. We need more engineers and scientists to leave university with the ability to communicate much better and to do more of talking to the outside non-technical world, because we're usually pretty good at dealing with with ourselves. One closing thought on that comes to mind. A long time ago, I was at a meeting of the American Council of Engineering Companies, and David McCullough, the famous author, was the speaker. And at the end of his talk, during the question and answer period, one engineer asked David do you have any advice to civil engineers? And his answer was somewhat clever, and I don't know if the language will come through or not, but he said he would like to see more civil engineers, more civil engineers. And what he meant by that is a lot of what we heard today is getting engineers in the university level to have a better appreciation of all the other factors other than the technical, the government, et cetera. And one of the ways to do that is perhaps have more liberal arts education, allowing students from engineering schools in their university to get more courses and interaction with the liberal arts community, the governance community, and that kind of thing. I think that's a strategy for expanding our thought. So it's probably not a summary. Maybe it was a bit of a summary and a speech, but I'd like to close with just thanking everyone very much for a fantastic webinar. So back to you, Nelson.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill, for that closing sum. I would like to see more civil in civil engineer. I always define civil as all but military is civil engineering, which means that civil engineering need to have a wider perspective of the social needs. So I'm not going to spend time to repeat what has been said by eminent speaker. I think it's fair to say that they've touched on all the issues. I hear the word that FIDIC need to kick the door, work with the consulting industry and help to make sure we educate the politician on what we need to do. I hear that do nothing is not an option. I hear that creativity is something we need to look at. I hear that technology and innovation is going to help us. I understand that our trusted advisor here is something we need to build on. And then the concept about think beyond individual, look at the society, and to come back to what Bill said is, let's get more civils in civil engineering. So on that point, I want to say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to our supporter, UNSIP, and thank you to Peter, thank you to Miguel, to April, to Jessica, and to Natalie, and to our president. Bill, thank you very much for your time and for supporting us. It's been an interesting discussion. What we are looking at now is we're actually moving into the next phase of the state of the world. We've done two. This is the second one. We'll be looking at tackling the global water crisis, building sustainable community, going digital. This is a COVID item, and net zero. So we have exciting time to look ahead, and those who are following us, please be on the lookout. This is quite important that we need to get the message out. Yes, we have the 3-in-1. We've got the webinar for committee. We have the online to do with the COVID that we're looking at, but more important, this one and the future one is to do with what I call the state of the world. We should give us some real thought-provoking, thought leadership idea to move on in the near future. What I see is an opportunity for me to say thank you to everybody, to those who are working behind the scene, Barbara, Natalie, and all of them who are actually working behind the scene to make sure we get this thing done, to Andy, and also to Chanel, and also Nadia, who are promoting us, and more important, to everybody who's been supporting the FIDIC initiative. I know a lot of people put some energy into this, particularly Graham, who put the reports together, to make sure we deliver. And boy, oh boy, we have a taskmaster and our president. He makes sure that we get the right outcome of that. So Bill, once and for all, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody. On that note, I'll say keep safe and God bless you. Thank you.